Nigel Farage has described it as an earthquake in British politics, but one thing's for certain. Last night's European results giving the pollsters plenty to talk about, so let's grab two of them for you. The Chief Executive of Pollsters, Ipsos Mori, Ben Page, and political analyst from Nottingham University, I can't get my words out, Professor Matthew Goodwin. We all know why, Matthew. Eastern Tech, there you go. Let's see where this leaves you guys then for a year till we go to the general election. Is this going to have any impact or not? Ben, to you first of all.
It's going to, but we still don't know in exactly what way. Most people didn't vote. Most people will vote at the general election. Nevertheless, it does suggest that UKIP damaged both Labour and the Conservatives. It makes a majority for either of the bigger parties less likely. It makes everything more uncertain. And absolutely one thing we can guarantee, whatever happens at the general election, it will be pretty historic in terms of the possible outcomes.
Philip Hammond, the Defence Secretary, has said he thought that a lot of Tory voters simply lent UKIP their vote, Matthew. I mean, is that right? I mean, obviously UKIP say, no, we've got the votes, we're going to keep hold of the votes, but how does it pan out as far as the general election is concerned?
Well, we're going to see a lot of comparisons now with 2009, when after the European elections, UKIP support completely crashed at the general election. There are good reasons to think that will not happen to anywhere near the same extent in 2015. One is Lord Ashcroft's polling, which suggests 1 in 2 UKIP voters at the European elections will stay loyal in 2015. The other is a nice resource that us academics use, the British election study, which suggests almost 2/3 of UKIP voters at the European elections will also vote UKIP at the general election. Now, those numbers are high, but anything above 7% next year starts causing real problems for David Cameron and the Conservatives. What
about the targeting? Because obviously there's been a pretty clear pattern emerge for Nigel Farage in the local and the Europeans, and he's looked at that and he said, look, it gives us a proper targeting strategy now. Does that sort of targeting, as much as it might help UKIP, does it actually benefit the other main parties in areas where UKIP aren't going to fight?
Well, the UKIP vote will obviously be higher where they're putting the real resources in, but nevertheless it's still an attractive place to go if you're fed up, if you're concerned about immigration. So they'll get votes everywhere, and that will also lead to damage, particularly to the Conservatives. But they will pick up, it does look very likely that there will be a UKIP MP, but probably still fewer than the poor old Lib Dems who've had a horrible night last night.
Let's talk about the Newark by-election next month. How telling will that be in what we can expect in the election next year? In
the European elections last night, UKIP won Newark. They finished first in Newark. And talking about the local hotspots for UKIP next year, they polled over 40% in 30 local areas. They polled over 50% in Boston, so looking at Boston and Skegness, Great Yarmouth, Thurrock, these kinds of areas, also Plymouth and Portsmouth. Doncaster, UKIP polled more votes than Labour. So this is really uncharted territory. They also beat Labour in Hartlepool, which has been Labour territory since 1964. So this is really, really interesting stuff. And as Ben says, I mean, it's very difficult to predict the impact of this in 2015.
For you guys, though, in terms of what you do, this must be a nightmare, must it? Because a lot of polls, it's not just a case of asking people what they want to do. You have to balance out, work out what sort of voters they were before, if they're living in one of the key heartlands. All that's out now, isn't it?
It does make the 2015 general election extremely interesting for pollsters, particularly because the turnout factor, we just don't know how many of those people at a general election who are sort of interested in UKIP actually get down to the polling station compared to the other parties. We have no real history to go on. So it's going to be an absolute nail-biter.
Go on. Well, and one of the things that we have just done is we sat down and analysed UKIP's vote over a 10-year period in a book that's just come out. And the conclusion, of that, and looking at the deeper trends in British society, is that this has been building pretty much since the 1970s. We've got a section of the electorate that is financially struggling, that is pessimistic, that is disadvantaged, that feels cut out of our politics. And this isn't just a backlash to the 2010 general election and coalition government. It isn't just about an EU referendum. This is about far deeper divisions within British society.
Well, in terms of those divisions, then, we heard someone saying earlier on, there's been a long time with a lot of social inclusion, a lot of the idea of a mixed cultural society that we saw, really develop with New Labour back in the sort of late 90s, early noughties. A lot of people now are clearly quite happy to say actually, I don't want any more immigration. Something they would have been embarrassed to put their name to a few years ago, that clearly is having an impact.
Well, concern about immigration has been at record levels now for the better part of a decade. And some months it's seen as the biggest issue facing this country. 80% of people in Britain say it's a big problem, although only 18% say it's a problem where they live.
And you know why this is problematic for the Conservatives in 2015? Because when you look at the UKIP loyalists, those who say, I'm going to stay with UKIP until the general election, it's those UKIP loyalists that are most animated by immigration. So the more our political parties and leaders start banging on about immigration, the more they risk strengthening the link between Farage and his core voters.
They're all between a rock and a hard place, aren't they? Ben, Matthew, great to see you both. Thank you.